I never thought I'd become the kind of person who digs up their own backyard in the middle of the night. But there I was, 72 years old, on my knees in the dirt, following instructions from a dead man. My husband had been gone for 3 years. I thought I knew everything about him. I thought I knew everything about my life. I was wrong. The letter arrived on a Tuesday. That's the kind of detail you remember when your entire world shifts. It was in Harold's handwriting. I'd know those careful, slanted letters anywhere. 43 years of marriage teaches you things like that. Margaret, it began. If you're reading this, then something I feared has come to pass. The property deed I left in your name is in danger. Someone close to you cannot be trusted. Look beneath our tree, and remember, trust your instincts, not their smiles. My hands shook as I read it. I thought about Richard Pemberton, our neighbor of 20 years, church elder, the man who'd held my hand at Harold's funeral and promised to help with all those confusing documents. The man who'd taken my property deed just 3 weeks ago, saying he'd keep it safe in his office lockbox. But that was just the beginning of my plan. The morning after I found the letter, I made myself a cup of tea and sat at my kitchen table, the same one where Harold and I had shared thousands of meals. The letter sat in front of me like an accusation. I kept thinking about the way Richard had smiled when I handed him the deed. That warm, reassuring smile that had made me feel so grateful to have such a helpful neighbor. How could I have been so blind? I picked up the phone 3 times that morning. Each time I started to dial the police station. Each time I put it down. What would I even say? That my dead husband sent me a letter warning me about someone? That I had a bad feeling? I knew exactly how that would sound. Instead, I got dressed and walked down Maple Street to the church. It was Wednesday, which meant Richard would be there organizing the food bank donations. If you've ever been betrayed by someone you love, this story is for you. The church smelled like old hymnals and furniture polish. It had been my sanctuary for 40 years. Now it felt like walking into enemy territory. "Margaret!" Richard's voice boomed across the fellowship hall. He was tall, silver-haired, exactly the kind of man people instinctively trusted. "What a lovely surprise! Come to help us sort canned goods?" I smiled. After decades of teaching high school English, I'd learned to mask my feelings when necessary. "Actually, Richard, I wanted to ask you something. About those documents you're keeping for me." His smile didn't waver. "Of course." "What about them?" "I was thinking I might need the property deed back, just to make some copies for my records." Something flickered in his eyes. Just for a second. "Oh, Margaret. I think it's better where it is. Much safer than keeping it in your house. What if there was a fire, or a break-in?" The way he said it made my skin crawl, as if I were a child who couldn't be trusted with her own belongings. "I suppose you're right," I said quietly. He patted my shoulder. "That's my girl. You know I'm looking out for you." I walked home slowly, my mind racing. That night, I pulled out my old address book. The pages were worn, filled with names from my teaching days. I ran my finger down the list until I found what I was looking for: Benjamin Chen, class of 2001. I remembered him as a quiet boy with sharp eyes and an endless curiosity. He'd gone on to become a journalist for the local paper. I'd seen his byline occasionally. I called the newspaper office the next morning. "Mrs. Stone?" Benjamin's voice sounded surprised but warm. "I can't believe it's really you." "Benjamin, I need your help. And I need you to believe me when I tell you that something very wrong is happening." There was a pause. Then, "Tell me everything." We met at the coffee shop on Birch Avenue, the one far enough from Maple Street that I wouldn't run into Richard. Benjamin had grown into a lean young man with the same intelligent eyes I remembered. He listened without interrupting as I explained everything: the letter, the deed, Richard's behavior. "You don't think I'm just a confused old woman?" I asked when I'd finished. He shook his head. "Mrs. Stone, you taught me to question everything and trust evidence. Let's find some evidence." Those words gave me strength I didn't know I still had. "There's more," I said. The letter mentioned looking beneath our tree. Harold and I planted an oak in our backyard when we first moved in. I think he buried something there. Benjamin leaned forward. "When can we dig?" We waited until after midnight. I felt ridiculous, sneaking around my own property like a criminal, but I couldn't risk Richard seeing us from his window next door. Benjamin brought a camping lantern and 2 shovels. We stood at the base of the oak tree, its branches spreading above us like protective arms. "Are you sure about this?" Benjamin asked gently. "I can do it alone if you want to go inside." I took one of the shovels. "This is my fight." We dug carefully, trying to disturb as little earth as possible. My arms ached within minutes. 72-year-old muscles aren't made for manual labor anymore, but I kept going. About 2 feet down, Benjamin's shovel hit something solid. "Wait," he whispered. We knelt in the dirt and brushed away the soil with our hands. A metal box emerged, about the size of a shoebox, wrapped in layers of plastic. My heart was pounding so hard I thought it might give out right there. Inside were documents, photocopies of property deeds, not just mine but 6 others, all signed over to something called the Maple Street Community Foundation, all with Richard Pemberton listed as the trustee, and beneath those, a handwritten note in Harold's distinctive script. "Margaret, I discovered this weeks before my surgery. Richard has been systematically taking property from elderly residents, convincing them to donate it for the community's benefit. The foundation doesn't serve the community, it serves him. I was going to expose him, but if you're reading this, I didn't survive to do it. I trust you to finish what I started. You're stronger than you know. All my love, H." Tears blurred my vision. Harold had known. He'd tried to protect me, even beyond death. Benjamin photographed every document with his phone, his face grim in the lantern light. "Mrs. Stone," he said quietly, "this isn't just about your property. This is fraud on a massive scale. We need to—" "Wait," I interrupted. "We can't go to the police yet." "Why not?" I thought about Richard's connections. The police chief attended our church. Half the town council did too. Because Richard has spent 20 years building trust in this community. If we accuse him without overwhelming proof, they'll protect him. They'll say I'm confused or bitter. We need more than documents buried in my backyard. Benjamin nodded slowly. "What do you suggest?" I looked at the house next door, dark and silent. "I suggest we do what I taught you in 11th grade English. We research, we investigate, we build our case carefully, and then we strike when he least expects it." A small smile crossed Benjamin's face. "You always did give the best assignments." Over the next 2 weeks, we became investigators. Benjamin used his press credentials to request financial records for the Maple Street Community Foundation. I visited the other names on Harold's list. Elderly neighbors I'd known for years. The pattern was sickeningly consistent. Martha Webb, 81, thought she'd donated her property to build a senior center. The center was never built. Thomas and Ellen Rodriguez believed their land would become a community garden. It had been sold to a developer. Gerald Shue's property was supposedly going to fund scholarships for local students. No scholarships were ever given. Each person had trusted Richard completely. Each had been manipulated with kindness and false promises. If you've ever felt powerless against someone who seemed untouchable, you'll understand what burned in my chest during those visits. It wasn't just anger, it was something colder, more focused, determination. One evening, Benjamin spread all our findings across my dining room table. "The foundation exists only on paper," he said. "Richard's been selling the properties and pocketing the money. He's made over $2 million in the past 5 years. I stared at the documents. $2 million stolen from people who'd trusted him. People who'd worked their entire lives for what little they had. "How do we expose him?" I asked. "We can't just write a newspaper article. He'll deny everything and sue for libel." Benjamin was quiet for a moment, then his eyes lit up. "The church fundraiser," he said. "Next month, the annual mission gala." I understood immediately. "Everyone will be there." "Everyone," Benjamin confirmed. "And if we present the evidence publicly, with witnesses, he can't hide." It was risky, bold, possibly foolish. It was perfect. Planning the exposure took precision. Benjamin reached out to contacts at the state attorney general's office, providing them with preliminary evidence. They agreed to have investigators present at the gala, but wanted the public revelation to happen first, to prevent Richard from destroying evidence once he knew he was being investigated. I had a harder task. I had to act normal. Every Sunday, I sat in church 3 rows behind Richard and his wife, Linda. I smiled at them after service. I made small talk about the weather and the upcoming fundraiser. Inside, I was screaming. Linda Pemberton was not a bad person. She'd brought me casseroles after Harold died. She'd driven me to doctor's appointments. She had no idea what her husband was doing. That made it harder somehow. 2 weeks before the gala, Richard stopped by my house. "Margaret, I've been thinking," he said, standing on my porch with that warm smile. "You really should consider putting your house into the foundation as well. When you're gone, it would provide such wonderful resources for the community." My house. The home Harold and I had built our life in. He wanted that too. I poured him lemonade with steady hands. "That's very thoughtful, Richard. Let me think about it." Of course, of course. No rush." He patted my hand. "You know I only want what's best for you." After he left, I stood at the sink for a long time, watching him walk back to his house. Some people think getting older means getting weaker. They're wrong. Getting older means understanding exactly how much you can endure, and how far you'll go when you've had enough. The night before the gala, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about all the people Richard had hurt. About Harold, trying to protect me even as he faced his own mortality. About the life savings and family homes stolen through manipulation and false friendship. Benjamin called at midnight. "Mrs. Stone? Are you okay?" "I'm terrified," I admitted. "What if this doesn't work? What if people don't believe us? Then we'll have tried. That's more than most people do." His words reminded me why I'd always loved teaching. Young people have this remarkable capacity for believing that doing the right thing matters. Sometimes they're right. The church fellowship hall was decorated with white balloons and fresh flowers. 300 people filled the space: families, seniors, church members, community leaders. Richard stood at the podium in a crisp blue suit, describing the foundation's wonderful work and encouraging more donations. I sat in the back row, Benjamin beside me. The state investigators were positioned near the exits, dressed like ordinary attendees. My heart hammered against my ribs. Richard finished his speech to warm applause. "And now, before dinner is served, I'd like to open the floor to anyone who wants to share how this community has blessed them." This was our moment. I stood up. My legs felt like water, but I walked toward the front. The room fell quiet. People weren't used to seeing me speak publicly anymore. "Margaret?" Richard's smile faltered slightly. "Did you want to say something?" I took the microphone from his hand. "Yes," I said. "I want to talk about trust." The room was completely silent. When my husband Harold passed away 3 years ago, I felt lost. Richard Pemberton became someone I relied on, a friend, a trusted advisor. When he offered to safeguard my property deed, I gave it to him gratefully. I saw Richard's face begin to pale. But recently I received a letter from Harold, written before his death and held by his attorney with instructions to deliver it if certain conditions were met. I pulled the letter from my purse and held it up. In this letter, my husband warned me that someone close to me was not to be trusted. He told me where to find evidence of fraud. "Margaret, I think you're confused," Richard began. "I'm not confused," I said firmly. "I found documents buried in my backyard. Photocopies of property deeds from 6 families in this community, all signed over to the Maple Street Community Foundation. All with you listed as trustee, Richard." Gasps rippled through the crowd. Benjamin stood and began distributing copies of the documents to people in the audience. "The foundation exists only on paper," I continued. "The properties were sold. The money, over $2 million, went into Richard Pemberton's personal accounts. The senior center that Martha Webb thought she was funding, never built. The community garden for the Rodriguez family, never planted. The scholarships in Gerald Shue's name, never awarded." Richard's face had gone from pale to red. "This is slander. These documents are forgeries." "Are they?" Benjamin stepped forward with his laptop. "Because I have bank records showing property sales and corresponding deposits. I have testimony from real estate agents and title companies. You have nothing," Richard's voice cracked. "I've served this church for 20 years. I've given everything to this community." The room erupted in confused murmurs. I stepped closer to Richard, looking directly into his eyes. "When I was younger, I taught English at Lincoln High School for 37 years. Do you know what I told my students every single day?" He didn't answer. "I told them that honesty is the hardest form of courage. That it's easy to lie when the truth is inconvenient. That character is built in the moments when no one is watching. My voice grew stronger. Today, I'm proving those words to myself, to this community, and to my husband's memory. I turned to face the crowd. Richard Pemberton manipulated elderly members of this community. He used our trust, our faith, and our friendship as weapons. He stole from people who had worked their entire lives for what little they had. If you've ever had to stand up for what's right when everyone else wanted to look away, you know how lonely that moment feels. But then Martha Webb stood up from her seat. "He took my home," she said, her voice shaking. "Told me it would help build something beautiful. There's nothing beautiful about being lied to." Thomas Rodriguez stood next. "He said we were doing God's work." One by one, people stood. The victims, their families, friends who were horrified by what they were hearing. Richard looked around wildly. His wife Linda was crying, her face in her hands. The police chief, who'd been sitting near the front, stood and walked toward Richard. "Mr. Pemberton, I think we need to talk downtown." Richard's legs seemed to give out. He grabbed the podium for support. "I was helping them," he whispered. "They didn't understand how to manage their properties. I was protecting them." "You were stealing from them," I said quietly. "And you would have taken everything from me too if Harold hadn't stopped you." The state investigators stepped forward, showing their credentials. As they led Richard away in handcuffs, the room remained silent. Then, slowly, applause began. It wasn't triumphant applause. It was sadder than that. The sound of a community processing a deep betrayal. Linda Pemberton approached me, mascara streaking her face. "I didn't know," she sobbed. "I swear I didn't know." I believed her, and I hugged her because she was a victim too, just in a different way. The trial took 6 months. Richard Pemberton was convicted on 14 counts of fraud, forgery, and elder abuse. He was sentenced to 12 years in prison. The properties that could be recovered were returned to their owners. The money that remained in his accounts was distributed among the victims. It wasn't enough. It could never be enough. But it was justice. Throughout those months, I learned things about myself I'd forgotten. That I was stronger than I'd believed. That age doesn't diminish your power to fight for what's right. That Harold had known me better than I knew myself. Benjamin wrote a series of articles about the case that won a state journalism award, but more importantly, they sparked investigations into similar schemes across the region. We saved more people than just ourselves. One evening, about a year after the gala, I sat in my backyard beside the oak tree. The hole we'd dug was long since filled in, the grass growing back green and strong. Benjamin joined me, bringing 2 cups of tea. "I got a call today," he said, "from a woman in Portland. She read my articles and thinks something similar is happening in her mother's retirement community." I smiled. "And you're going to investigate?" "We're going to investigate, if you're willing." I thought about using my experience, my voice, my remaining years to protect others who couldn't protect themselves. "Yes," I said, "I'm willing." He grinned. "You know, Mrs. Stone, you were always my favorite teacher." "But I think you might have found your true calling in retirement." "Better late than never," I replied. We sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the sun set behind the houses of Maple Street. The neighborhood looked the same as it always had. But everything was different. Richard's house had been sold. A young family lived there now, with 2 small children who played in the yard. Life moved on. Sometimes I still felt angry about what he'd done, about the betrayal, the manipulation, the years of false friendship. But mostly, I felt grateful. Grateful that Harold had loved me enough to protect me even after death. Grateful that Benjamin had believed me when others might not have. Grateful that I'd found the courage to fight back. I framed Harold's letter and hung it in my living room, right above the mantel where our wedding photo sits. Every morning, I read his final words to me. "You're stronger than you know." He was right. The Maple Street Advocacy Group meets every Tuesday in the Church Fellowship Hall now. We teach seniors about financial fraud, legal rights, and how to protect themselves from predators who use kindness as a weapon. We've helped 43 people in the past year, 43 families who might have lost everything. Martha Webb helps lead the meetings, so does Thomas Rodriguez. Even Linda Pemberton joined us after her divorce was finalized. She said she needed to do something good with what she'd learned from her ex-husband's crimes. Forgiveness is complicated, but it's also necessary if you want to keep living instead of just existing. Last week, a woman in her 80s approached me after one of our meetings. "I just wanted to thank you," she said. "My nephew was pressuring me to sign over my house to him. But after hearing your story, I consulted a lawyer instead. He was trying to steal from me." She hugged me tightly, and I felt Harold's presence in that moment, felt his pride in what I'd become. This wasn't the retirement I'd imagined. I thought I'd spend my final years in quiet peace, tending my garden and rereading old books. Instead, I became a warrior, not the kind with weapons or violence, but the kind who fights with truth, the kind who refuses to be silent when silence protects the guilty. Some people say I should let the past go, that I'm too old to be crusading for justice. But here's what I've learned. You're never too old to matter. You're never too old to make a difference. You're never too old to stand up for what's right. Age doesn't make us invisible unless we choose to disappear. Last night, I dreamed of Harold. We were young again, planting that oak tree in our backyard. He looked at me and smiled. "You did good, Margaret," he said. "You did real good." I woke up with tears on my face, but they were good tears. The kind that come from grief transforming into purpose. The kind that come from knowing you honored someone's faith in you. My hair is silver now. My hands shake sometimes. I move slower than I used to, and some days my bones ache with the weight of all these years. But my voice is strong, and I'll keep using it for as long as I have breath. Because real family isn't just the people you're related to. Real family is the people who actually want you there. The people who fight for you. The people who believe you when everyone else says you're too old to know your own mind. Benjamin still visits every Sunday. We have tea and plan our next investigation. He calls me his partner now, not his teacher. I call him my friend. That day at the gala, when I stood up and spoke the truth, justice was finally served. Not just for me, not just for Harold, but for everyone who'd been silenced by someone else's greed. For the first time in 3 years, I feel free. Free from the weight of betrayal. Free from the fear of being seen as weak or confused. Free to be exactly who I was meant to be in this final chapter of my life. Someone who matters. Someone who fights. Someone who wins. I stand at my kitchen window every morning now, watching the sun rise over Maple Street. The same street I've lived on for 40 years. The same houses, the same trees, the same rhythm of suburban life. But I see it differently now. I see a community that survived a predator. I see neighbors who learned to question instead of blindly trust. I see strength in unexpected places. And I see myself reflected in that window, not as a victim, but as a survivor who became something more. A voice for the voiceless, a shield for the vulnerable. A reminder that justice delayed is not always justice denied. Sometimes it's just justice waiting for the right person to demand it, so I'll keep demanding it, for as long as I'm able, because that's what Harold would have wanted. That's what I owe to the memory of the man who loved me enough to protect me from beyond the grave. And that's what I owe to myself. The letter from Maple Street changed everything. It revealed a betrayal that could have destroyed me. Instead, it transformed me. And now I ask you, wherever you're listening to this story, what would you have done?